Welcome to the All Clear Firefighter Wellness Podcast, where grit meets growth and excuses get burned away. This is about mental, physical, and personal growth. Light your fire within. Let's get after it.
All clear, where the truth cuts through.
We've got Dr. Jeff Burgess with us today. Now, Dr. Burgess, I'm having to look at my notes because you got a long title. You are the professor and director of the Firefighter Health Research Program at the University of Arizona Zuckerman College of Public Health. So I'm just going to turn it over to you because you are one of the experts in the world of firefighter wellness and particularly cancer, which is, kind of near and dear to our hearts. And that's one of the topics that we cover quite frequently. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell us about yourself and how you wound up here.
Sure. Well, thank you, Travis. So my background is in medicine. So I trained and practiced as an emergency physician, as a medical toxicologist. That's the type of doctor that generally works with poison centers, looking at people with occupational environmental exposures, among other things. And then worked also as an occupational environmental medicine physician for a while. And then I kind of gave all of that up to focus specifically on research, which is what I've been working on now for many years. And I've been working with firefighters for over 30 years, and specifically on the cancer topic since about 2015. So I really enjoy working with firefighters. The work we do is collaborative, so the questions come from firefighters, and we do our best to provide them answers so that they can use that information to make changes into their work to help maintain their health for the long term.
So how did you wind up focusing on firefighters? I know that's kind of for us, it's a common thing and we appreciate it, but in the world in general, that's a very niche topic.
Well, when I was here did my emergency medicine medical toxicology here at the University of Arizona, and then actually did medical school at the University of Washington, then came down here, did those programs, went back up to the University of Washington for a while, and then came back down here to Arizona. The firefighting stuff started. I was doing some additional training in toxicology here at the University of Arizona, and my advisor was the one who did respiratory testing in terms of seeing how well respirators fit onto someone's face. So we started to do that work with Tucson Fire Department, again, many years ago, and just to see how well their respirators performed. So that kind of got me started, got me interested in, the protection the firefighters had. And then when I went back up to the University of Washington as an occupational medicine physician fellow, they gave me and then as on the faculty there, they gave me the medical surveillance work for the Seattle Fire Department. So I would look at the results of their medical surveillance examinations, their annual medical evaluations, and look to see whether there were any changes that were concerning, and then contact those individual firefighters. But we also looked at the broader category of just, whether things changed over time. And we started to notice certain trends. So that got me even more interested in what was going on with the health of firefighters. And then when I came back down here to the University of Arizona, I know this is a very long story, I apologize, but we began to specifically measure their exposures and the effects of those exposures, and it just went from there.
So you have opened up quite a few things that kind of got me off when I started working with the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Alliance. A lot of the studies that really pushed My curiosity and my interest in it, I'm not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV, but I have a very keen interest, and specifically for exposures for like fire investigators and things like that. It's a little different than your typical firefighter. But there was a lot of research that came out of California, out of Washington, and Arizona. What is it? The Vincere Cancer Institute out there with the screening and things that they're doing. It looks like the West Coast, I think, was way ahead of the curve before it got over here to the East Coast where we are. But when you look at cancer, sadly, the fire service is very reactive. And, you go to a conference and something's different every year. They got to have something to be cool. Cancer was cool. I hate to use that term, probably about 2 or 3 years ago. Then it's mental health. Now it's obesity. Then it was cardiac. So it's something different every year. But we know that cancer has not gone away. What is the current issues in cancer that we as firefighters need to be aware of? What is the new stuff, for lack of a better term, that we're seeing? What are the exposures? Is it still, skin absorption, or is there new things that we need to be aware of?
Well, certainly the on-the-job exposures remain really important. And as you pointed out, skin absorption is something that you have to pay attention to, in addition, of course, to the usual inhalation hazards. So in that regard, I don't think anything has changed. I mean, those are the major sources. There's also exposure to the PFAS or forever chemicals. I mean, that continues to be an issue for firefighters, and that levels in their blood than non-firefighters. Also, the things that firefighters like sleep and exercise and diet are really important. And I think firefighters know that and they're paying attention to it. But you can also use it to help, protect yourself again against these cancer hazards. And then while cancer is, really important, the chemicals that you're exposed to on the job can also affect other parts of your body. So you have strong reason to believe that they're also responsible for adverse reproductive effects. Also, some of the newer work that's coming out, that includes neurodegenerative effects of firefighting exposures. So I think it's important to think about exposure reduction more broadly, not just as a way of reducing cancer risk.
And there's a lot to unpack in that. And you touched on it, PFAS, especially in gear. That has been such a hot topic for probably the last 2 or 3 years. And here in North Carolina, we were talking about Dr. Brian Ormond, who's a friend of mine, friend of the show for a long time. He he's done an extensive amount of research in how much PFAS is, too much, where is it coming from? Is it just gear? Is it when you wear Gore-Tex when you go fishing? It can be from any number of things. But at the same time, I hear other fire chiefs like, "Oh man, that PFAS, yeah, it's a thing, but we just got to get over it." So I've heard both extremes of it. What do you think is the real takeaways that we should take about PFAS when it comes to gear? Because some gear has it, some doesn't, some has limited. What's your take on that?
Well, I like to think about PFAS as being more than just an issue. And as you mentioned, Dr. Brian Ormond is, the expert on the PFAS in gear. And he's done extensive, so I think he can, tell you a lot about where it is, how it travels, and things of that nature. We consider it just one source but one potential source among many for the firefighters, and the other sources being things like their drinking water. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
If it's contaminated, they're going to have a higher level. That way, we found that if you can measure the PFAS level of the drinking water of the firefighters, they're going to have higher levels in their body. Also, use of aqueous film forming foam. So fewer firefighters are using that now, but that still remains a very important source of exposure. If you use it, you're going to have higher levels in your body. And then, we're getting some signs to do that. You're in responding to fires, you can get some PFAS exposure from that as well. So these are all different sources that firefighters can have. And we've been actually recently within our Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study and some affiliated studies have found a number of risks for higher PFAS levels, both for firefighters at work and kind of in there and outside of work. And that's something that, we've been sharing more broadly. That should be published soon. And so when that's available, we can share the complete set of information. But so it is not the only exposure by any means, but it is important exposure. And I think you need to think about it just like you do, figuring out ways to reduce exposure to products that can build fire, and also ways that you can improve your sleep, right? Your exercise, your diet. These are all things that you should be focusing on as a firefighter.
And that's good advice, and I do wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. PFAS is a factor, but there's so many other things that we realized, even 5 years ago, that we need to take into consideration. The skin absorption, just cleaning your gear, just keeping yourself clean. Just basic things can make a huge difference. But now I'm going to ask you a very controversial question, and this has been a conversation topic I don't know how many times. Whenever you talk about removing carcinogens from your body, when you talk about getting rid of the stuff, we know taking a shower helps. Should you shower with hot water or cold water? I know that is a strange question, but that has been probably more debated than anything over here when we have classes and we talk with firefighters around the state.
Well, I think what's most important is that you shower with as soon as you can after a fire, and with, you've been exposed to really high temperatures. You're going to be hot within your turnout, everything beforehand. I actually don't know how much of a difference it makes if you take a cold or a hot shower, but my advice has always been just shower as soon as you can and do things that will make that shower, you're more likely to shower. If I were a firefighter, I'd probably prefer kind of warm water than really cold water, unless I was really hot, right? So I would like to actually start, though, a little upstream, if you will, of
Sure.
taking a things that we found a number of years ago, and then in work that we did in collaboration with the Tucson Fire Department, was that if you do that on-scene washdown or decontamination at the fire scene, so your entry team comes out of the fire, you before you remove your SCBA, even take before you remove your face piece, you wash with soap and water. So just a brush, soap, water, quick rinse. If you do it right, you don't get your gear particularly wet inside, at least according to my colleagues at Tucson Fire Department. And do that, you can reduce the number of chemicals that come from the fire that get into your body, that we can measure into the urine, by over 30%. And we really found, and we've been sharing, that beyond that, if you do that as a regular practice, you have higher levels of at least one PFAS chemical in your system. You have lower levels of at least one PFAS chemical in your body. So now we have two reasons to do that on-scene washdown. One, to reduce those acute, exposure you get from the fire, and two, to reduce these levels of these more persistent PFAS chemicals as well. So that's something I think is really important. And then obviously, if you, the sooner you can take off your contaminated gear, not wearing it when you don't need to, that will all help reduce the amount of chemicals that you continue to get exposed to. Then, beyond that, again, taking a shower, cleaning your gear is also really important. So we've shown previously, and actually finding it now with our wildland firefighters as well, that, if you don't wash your gear, you're actually getting exposure from previous fires. And so by washing your gear, after each time it gets contaminated, you're reducing the potential to get exposed again to those chemicals.
Here in Concord, I'm a member of the Concord Fire Department, and back in about 2000, I'm trying to think, probably 2013, 14. This is when we really started identifying cancer as an issue, and our chief at the time and our current chief are very proactive in addressing this. And one of the things that we did is we sat down with our logistics officer, who was a cancer survivor at the time. He had this idea. He said, "Okay, let's take a bucket, and in that 5-gallon bucket, let's put some detergent. Let's put a brush. Let's put a 2.5 inch, or not 2.5, excuse me, like a garden hose instead of having to pull up the 2.5 to spray down with." And this concept of a bucket came up. And I don't know if we're the first that came up with that. Maybe, maybe not. But I've never seen one prior to that. But in that whole conversation we had, we developed what was called the Concord decontamination model. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can find it on there, allclearpodcast.com. And it addressed a lot of exactly what you're talking about. Give it a wash down right there on scene, get as much of the crud off of it as you can. But the step that we identified, and we're looking at it now, is when we would take the gear off there on scene, particularly if it was a long working duration fire, we were bagging up the gear and not putting it in the cab, but putting it in the back of the truck. Because maintaining the clean cab was what we identified. And we're not scientists, we're just guys that, do stuff. We figured that if you kind of limit the exposure to dirty gear in the cab, that helps. But then we also have coveralls that we carry that the guys can zip up and get into prior, going back to the station to clean up. That way they're kind of encapsulating the stuff to their bodies for that short ride back. You can typically be back at one of our stations within, about 7 minutes with traffic. So that was what we developed. And like I said, none of it was new, but we were trying to find a cheap, effective model that anybody could put into service in their department. And, getting the stuff off of you as soon as possible is probably the most critical factor from what we've found. But in your professional opinion, when it comes to cleaning your gear off and stuff like that, I know that that's starting to go into like the gear side of stuff. But physically, when you're handling that gear in your breakdown room, in your washroom, should you be wearing gloves when you do it? Should you be wearing like an appropriate respirator while you're dealing with that dirty gear, even if you've washed it down or at least got it, wet deconned on site?
To be perfectly honest, I am not sure how much exposure you kind of get at that point, but I don't see any downside for protecting yourself. Particularly I'd wear gloves. Absolutely. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. It's dirty gear. You get it on your skin. It's going to go in. And I think that, you also have the potential, obviously, when you're handling that dirty gear, really soon after fire, to health gas. So in that case, having some respiratory protection, would be a good idea. However, again, like I said, I'm not sure exactly how much exposure you get there, but there's a lot of things I think you can think about that make sense, that haven't necessarily always been proven by science to be effective. And as long as they're not dangerous, I think it's they're good things to do. But the nice thing is, we're getting more of an evidence base for what does make a difference that we know for sure. And doing the on-scene washdown does make a difference. Cleaning your gear right after a fire before you use it again does a difference, does reduce your exposure. And that's true for both structural and wildland firefighters. And so, those are things that I think every firefighter should do. And obviously, the one thing that we haven't talked about yet, which isn't new, but I think is really critical, is continuing to wear your protection, particularly during overhaul.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you take
Absolutely.
and I just I want to kind of give one clear reason, I think, for wearing your SCBA during overhaul, and that is if you look at the cancer that has the % increase in firefighters compared to the general population, mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is, as you know, Travis, from asbestos exposure. And where we've showed years ago, I think, that that when you do overhaul in older houses, you can be exposed to asbestos, and that's really the location where you get the exposure. So, just wearing SCBA during overhaul could reduce markedly the increased rate of mesothelioma that we're seeing in firefighters.
And
so, among
yeah.
other things too, again, the effects we talked about.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The mask comes off way too quick sometimes when you see stuff like that happening. But I myself, fire investigation is what I principally do. And when I'm there, the fire's typically out or, in the final phases. And one of the big things that I've been taught, and I'm assuming that there's a reason that it's not changed in all the years, that when you work as an investigator, you need to wear a mask when you're digging, when you're, going through the scene, doing your evaluation. But the fact that bladder cancer seems to be something that is disproportionately high in investigators, just based off of, numbers that I've seen in some research studies and things such as that bladder cancer seems to be off the charts more so for investigators, just because of the fact that, we're playing in stuff after it's already been out for maybe an hour or something like that. Are there any preventative steps that you could think of that investigators could take to help reduce their exposures?
We'll return after these messages.
Wake up slow, grab your mug, it's time to roll. All clear coffee, fire in your soul, brewed by Firefighter, strong and true. One bean at a time, we're looking out for you. From first sip through your last call of the day, fuel your fight, keep the drag away. Get your bag now, don't wait, don't stall. Allclearpodcast.com. Hey! We got beans for all.
Well, we actually are cancer studies because a fire cause investigator, Snell, at Tucson Fire Department, died of leukemia, and so he spent many years investigating thousands of fires without any respiratory protection, very little on the way, with gloves, and boots, but not much additional thermal protection.
Right.
And he died of leukemia, which is known to be associated with benzene exposure, and you get benzene at fires. So, at that time, even though it was a presumptive cancer in Arizona, it still got declined because there was additional information was needed, and I think we were still early in this process of gathering information. So, because of that, we really thought about the fire investigators in addition to the else. So it's not just entry teams, in the actual fire. You actually get exposures in the engineers that are outside of the fire, you get exposures in the paramedics. So I think you need everybody at the fire scene, but specifically the fire investigators are there still when everybody else leaves, right? And they come back later on and they continue to get exposure. And, and as you said, they weren't using much protection at all. So I think it's absolutely for fire investigators to have both respiratory and dermal protection. So I like the idea of one of those disposable Tyvek suits, right? I mean, they're relatively inexpensive. I think they provide good protection that way. From the perspective of respiratory protection, I think if they're there early on after a fire, like within 24 hours, I mean, I think SCBA is really a good thing to wear. And then after that, I think, you need to continue to use other types of respiratory protection, either air purifying respirators or ideally those powered air purifying respirators, if your fire investigators can get them. I mean, those are really nice because ones are fairly lightweight. And since you don't have to pull the air through yourself, through the cartridge, they don't require much additional respiratory work. So I think those are really good things for the investigators to have.
And where I am for investigations, typically we wear wildland gear is what we wear when we do just our investigations, because we don't need the thermal protection typically. Things like that. It's easy to launder. It goes in, it goes out quick, and it seems to fit our needs very well. But we did for a while use an SCBA mask with a like a screw-on filter. We had an adapter. We used MSA, and we found out that it was more cost-effective, more comfortable, and easier to deal with by having like the half-mask respirators like you're talking about. Once the air has been sampled and it's all good, we'll go to that. And, we've been doing that for about 2 years now. And that's been a nice change, especially when you're old like me, having to have glasses to see what you're doing. It cuts down on all the contraptions you have to put inside of the mask. So, there are advantages to be said for all of that. But, it's been nice to talk with you about all of these things. And it's good to see things haven't really changed. It's not like some big new technology sneaking in, or, there's some new thing we have to watch out for. It's nice. It's kind of comforting. I know that seems weird that we kind of know what the enemy is, and we know what is some of the most effective ways to deal with it. We declared victory, or at least the Cancer Wellness Alliance did earlier this year. We said, the first part of our mission is over. Everybody knows that firefighters can get cancer. That, it's not a solved problem, but I think the awareness factor is taken care of. And through research of folks like you, the cohort study, which I do want you to talk about before you go, there's a lot of studies that are going on that are proving what we already believed, but at the same time, we see that there are a few things like PFAS that's popped up, and then the foam and things like that. But tell us about the cohort study here in North Carolina, Duke University, NC State. They're working on it. I know you guys in Arizona very much in line with it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that program?
Sure. So the Firefighter Study, or FFCCS, we enrolled our first participant in 2018, and now we have over 8,300 firefighter participants from 32 states across the country. And as you mentioned, North Carolina has, under the direction of Dr. Heather Stapleton and Brian Ormond, are enrolling firefighters. I heard there were just over 750 enrolled so far. I know they're focusing on PFAS exposures particularly, but it's a big umbrella, if you will, or system. Different people different investigators, different researchers can enroll firefighters. They can all have their own studies, but there are certain things that everyone does. And those things are, when you enroll the firefighters, you have a certain questions they answer. We collect blood and urine in the same way. We collect blood and urine again after 2 years so we can look at changes, and after specific exposures that would be of interest. Like, for example, with our wildland firefighters, we're collecting urine after fires to see what the exposures are. And with the Los Angeles, urban conflagrations back in January, we're looking at changes in blood proteins, for example. That just recently came out. So by following the firefighters over time, often and almost always before they get cancer, although firefighter with cancer could enroll, where most firefighters don't have it when they start, and following them over time and collecting this information, we can determine the exposures that are resulting in increased cancer and other things like adverse reproductive effects. And also, through affiliated studies, we can begin to look at ways to either reduce the exposures or reduce the effects of those exposures. So this is this study, again, the Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study, has a heavy focus on collection of blood and urine as biological markers. That's different than the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer, or NFR, that I'm sure most of your listeners have heard about. That's run by NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. The director is Dr. Kenny Fent, a fantastic researcher. It's a really important study. They don't collect blood and urine, but they're going to be a lot bigger than us. We aim to be about 10,000, and they aim to be maybe 200,000 or more firefighters. So they're going to have a lot more information about individual cancer risk, but we'll be able to look at changes that occur in the bodies of the firefighters over time before disease occurs. And so we work together, we're collaborative, but those are just kind of two of the major studies that are out there.
And I will kind of give a little call to action. Here in North Carolina, if you're not a member of the cohort study here, it is very easy to get enrolled. They're at Midwinter Chiefs here in Concord. They'll be in Raleigh at the Safer Conference. You'll always see the guys from Duke there, and they're ready to take your blood, ready to take that urine sample. So be well hydrated when you go in. I was dusty when I got out. Me and one of the other board members, we figured we'd be one of the first ones in for the state to try to, so we could encourage people to do it and, try to lead by example as best we can. But if you haven't enrolled, please do. And it does nothing but pass the information along and really help make some important changes to what's going on in the fire service. Well, Dr. Burgess, I really appreciate you taking time. It's been really encouraging to talk to you. Hopefully you've had a good time. Hopefully you'd be willing to come back at some point in the future. We just have fun here. Like I said, we're just, lay people that have kind of tried to listen to what experts are saying and trying to find a way to make it work. And I think that's, the research on y'all's end and the people on our side trying to figure out how to clean gear and what's the best way to make the protocols work. At some point, hopefully this won't be an issue that we have to face, or the future generations of fire service won't have to face. But anyway, again, thank you so much. Do you have a website or some way folks can learn more about Dr. Burgess and all the wonderful things y'all are doing over there in Arizona?
Well, sure. I mean, it's not just the University of Arizona, but it's many universities and fire departments working together, fire departments. And you can find the information on the various studies within the Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study at FFCCS.org. And if you're interested too, there's a email there. You can ask for additional information if you can't find what you're looking for.
Okay, very good. And we'll have your bio and info in the notes and on our website as well. And again, Doc, thank you so much for taking time to hang out with us a little bit today and kind of give us some insight on how the battle against cancer in the fire service is progressing. So, as we always say here on our podcast, light your fire within. That's a wrap. All clear. Like, subscribe, and watch the video on YouTube. Do it now. Shout out to the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Wellness Alliance, keeping our crews alive and strong. Hit allclearpodcast.com for every past episode. Grab your battalion newsletter. No spam, no selling, just the real deal. Stay sharp, watch your six, and we'll see you on the next call.